Welcome to Dying in Grace, the program that aims to bring all things about death and dying out from the closet, out from the taboo, and have a full discussion about it. My name is Arlene Stepputat, and each week I bring a guest to talk about some aspect of end-of-life wellness or death and dying. If you'd like to see other shows that we've done in the past, you can either go to YouTube, Dying in Grace, or go to our website, dyingingrace.com. There we have at least 15 other shows that we have posted, so you can see the wide range of topics that we cover. You can also follow us at Twitter. This week, I'm delighted to have my friend, Andrew Jannetti, who's a choreographer and a dancer, and someone that I have known for decades. We'll just leave it at that. They can guess how many decades. So thanks, Andrew, for being on the show.
You're quite welcome. It's my
and
pleasure.
I think because we've, Andrew is from New York City, and we lived together through the AIDS crisis
Yes.
in New York City as much younger people. And I think it shaped me living through the AIDS crisis, and I'm wondering what your early remembrances are of the AIDS, maybe when it first got started, or what it was like for you.
Well, being in New York City, which was kind of one of the epicenters of the AIDS crisis, and being in the theater and the dance world and in the art world, like it was so affected by it in so many ways. At the time, I was waiting on tables. A lot of my friends were waiting on tables. We were going to auditions. We were doing dances, whatever we were doing on this as our real lives. And waiting on tables was the way we made money. But those people that I met through all of those, waiting on tables in the dance world, in the theater world, in the art world, when the AIDS crisis hit, and no one knew what it was about, it was very startling to watch someone so quickly become infected and then die from it. And we're talking people in their 20s, maybe had some friends in their 30s at the time. So it was a very powerful impact on all of us, and there was really a lot of discrimination too, because it was considered a gay disease, even though it's not.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's a disease that affects many, many people, and people would like not want you to wait on their table. Like, I remember that happening at restaurants. Like, if they found out that you were gay, they would like clean everything when you brought it to the table, because somehow like people didn't want to lie down on the floor after an exercise class. If they would clean the floor before they lie down, because no one knew and no one understood what it was about. So those things impacted, and then losing people at such like a young age. And if you knew someone for a while and then you actually lost touch for a year, and then you found out that they had passed away because of AIDS, you know, or a friend of mine who lost his partner for many, many years, and then had to struggle to keep what he and his partner had together, because his partner's parents came after him for the house they had together, you know, they had bought together, you know, because there was no protections at that time, you know. So there was a lot of people going through a different, heavy grief around this disease that was still not understandable yet.
Right.
And people pulled together. And, there was lots of anger for sure, but I think the anger was directed in a way to pull the community together to make it this sounds weird, comforting, that even though you're losing people, how can you find some solace and some positivity out of that? The art world, the dance world, lost many people who never fulfilled their potential, for sure.
Right.
You know, so.
Well, I think what's true is the world. I mean, yes, the dance world, the art world, the theater world but I think the world just, I mean, there were so many young people, we didn't even get a chance. But, you know, I think back on that, and I think of the very first person. I was teaching at the time, and our receptionist had been incarcerated for a while, and we gave him a second chance. We were an inner city school trying to give somebody a break, and he was a great guy, and then he was sick, and I heard, oh, he's in the hospital, he's got pneumonia. I was like, oh, that's too bad. But it was winter time, and you know, in the East, and so I didn't think that much about it. And then I said, well, how's he doing? And somebody said, oh, you didn't hear Martin died. I went, died?
Yeah.
People don't die of pneumonia. I mean, you're 90, you die of pneumonia. You're not 25 and die of pneumonia. And that was, I think, at the point where they were still calling it GRID, or no, at that point they didn't even know.
No, they didn't know. Right, you're right. When that was
and
that
then
early,
it became
right.
GRID, gay related, which was a whole thing. And then I remember there was a piece where it was the 4 H's. You know, hemophilia. I can't remember, Haitians, hemophiliacs, homosexuals, and heroin addicts or something. And those were the so that was lumped together too. I just remember being scared for my gay friends. And I think it's hard for people to understand. I think unless you live through something like that, it's kind of hard to understand, like, the energy that is just pervasive over, like, the city. I mean, it was everywhere, everyone, and it just got worse and worse and worse. And first it was a handful of people, and then it was so many more people. And
then somebody would get a rash, and they were like, you would start to like freak out if this rash was the first sign that something was coming, something else was down the road, like, you know, and so anytime you felt ill, you know, it was like, am I gonna? Is this it? Like,
right.
is this gonna, like,
if
you
I
said,
have a sore throat,
right.
I must have AIDS, right?
Yeah. So.
And I think, you know, in a way, it was very telling where we were in the culture about a lot of things. People didn't talk about sexuality the way we do now. They didn't talk about, but they had to, and just trying to get people to prevent it, even though they didn't even know all about how people contracted. There was theories, things weren't proven, and I had, you know, some of my own experiences, because besides the people that were dying, many of them were women who were leaving children behind, who were also HIV positive, and no one wanted to even touch those babies, so they started living in hospitals.
Yeah, I know, it's you know, being involved in the arts and being and always having been an educator, there was a period of time when I had a number of students who, when they were babies, had lost both parents to AIDS, and now were being raised by other caregivers. It could be an aunt, or grandmother, an uncle, whatever it was. But at one time in one of my programs, there was at least 8 of them in the same program. So not only are you dealing with the people who have died from AIDS, who may have meant something to you, but now you're dealing with the aftermath of it and what it means to these other young people to now have the realization that that's what their parents, both parents, died of, and then you are dealing with them and their other caregivers at this point, like, you know.
And how they hold that death. You know, it's hard enough as a child to lose a parent. I mean, you're a little child, you expect your parent. I mean, so that's tough. But to lose both, and then depending on how that death is contexted. So if you're told your parents died of a terrible disease and there was no cure for it at the time, that goes down a lot differently than saying, well, you know, your mother was an HIV drug user, or a heroin addict, and so, you know, she had a dirty needle or whatever. I mean, so that's really, it's interesting to see, because I don't think people, a lot of young people don't even think of HIV?
I,
Much.
I don't hear it. I mean, I teach a lot of young people. I teach all ages, but at the college where I teach a course once a week, I don't hear them speaking about it like that. I think it's become this manageable disease, and I think that people do take more precautions. But even then, I'm not so sure that is not the way that it was being dealt with in the 80s and into the 90s, for sure. It was so much on people's minds. Everything was about precaution and how you could protect yourself and what would and any signs that you had, like, of something that would be, like I said before, an illness, where that would lead. You know, having lost like a number of people between 26 and 36, you know, during those years, and I would turn around and somebody say, "Oh, do you know they died?" I go, "Oh, it was the same experience you had." Well, they were in the hospital, and I didn't even know that it was that serious even. So it's I don't know. It was very disconcerting time. It was, and definitely there was no way of. There was no protections either. Like, you know, now with like legalized marriage for gay people, it's much easier to have each other if anything was to happen. You know, but there was no protections if something happened to your partner, and you were left. You couldn't even go to the hospital sometimes.
Right.
You wouldn't be allowed into the hospital.
Right.
So there's like all this collateral stuff that went around where it was attached to the AIDS. Like it could be a person you've been living with for 10 years and they're dying of AIDS, and you can't go to the hospital because you're not legally married to them.
Or stay in the apartment if it was in their name, or any of those things.
Right.
Yeah, it's really interesting because two things happened for me around AIDS in particular. One was I was working with homeless and runaway street kids at Covenant House in New York.
Yes.
And
I had some of them work for me, actually.
Right, and the way kids on the street, before they find any kind of solution or safe place that they're willing to trust, turn tricks. And so we found ourselves in the health crisis dealing with young teenage boys predominantly that themselves were sick, had no money. The hospitals didn't want to deal with them really. They didn't have any family. They'd run away from home. And we ended up creating the first AIDS unit for teenagers in the country. And again, we didn't know exactly what we were doing, but we also could not turn our backs, which I think that was one of the interesting things. And I think that's true whenever there's death. There are those that can step up and serve, whether it's a family dealing with a sudden death or an illness. There's people in the sphere that can step up, and then there's people that can't handle it, and they just take off. And there's something about that ability to stand in the face of suffering, the unknown, and really taking the risk yourself. I mean, when they didn't know what was going on, if you were working in the AIDS with people who had AIDS, there was could be fear. I think a lot of people were quite brave about it, and you know, they were just doing a retrospective about Princess Diana, and you know, her willingness to touch people with AIDS. I mean, that was a message to the world.
Right.
But it was very difficult, and I remember having a friend that was very, very ill, and then as we were dealing, and we were young, I mean, it was young people that were dying, and so there was something about that, and in large numbers, that just was terrifying.
Yeah, it was definitely terrifying, but I think one of the things that came out of it in the gay community anyway was that, as you said, about people who were willing to go the distance, or people who were willing to take the chance. The gay community came together in a way that it really hadn't before. And when I say the gay community, I'm including all our gay brothers and sisters. And there was lots of people in the lesbian community who actually came to help their brothers in the community. And like that, I think that was a really powerful event in itself that happened. And I think we learned about caregiving as a result, which we may not have learned about in quite the same way had we not experienced that. You know, which speaks to the whole thing of caregiving when people are dying. Like I remember people just like breaking down on my shoulder because they had traveled all the way to Texas because their friend was dying of AIDS and they had to visit them, and they had to figure out how to help them, and they came back like just totally devastated by what they had witnessed. And you know, and that sense of caring for each other in this community, which then I think enlarged to a larger community. You know, I think it may have started in the gay community, but I really feel like once you understood that it was not a gay disease, that we had to somehow deal with this together, you know, and I think like that.
Yeah, and it was impacting, you know, people that were getting blood transfusions.
Yes,
it was
right.
impacting all kinds of
needle users. I mean, I had a brother-in-law that used a needle all the time, you know, and it was like, and I was nervous about that because it was my sister, it was my niece, and like, you know, so I had to, nothing ever happened, luckily, but it was always on your mind that it could happen, like, you know, because of that.
Right, and at the thing too about that was the second you got the diagnosis, it was death.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah,
and usually a horrible death. I mean, it was really a horrible death. And you know, as I was saying those words, I was thinking, because I did a lot of work with Alzheimer's disease, and that's similar. As soon as you get diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, you know that the path. I mean, they're doing a lot of interventions and, you know, research, but it's still right now, you know, the path you're going on. It's a death sentence too, but very different journey. And you know, the thing I wanted to say too was, talking earlier about the children, I helped found the first program for babies with AIDS, which was also collateral damage of what was going on. And when we worked with the AIDS Resource Foundation for Children, which is still around, we started just visiting the babies that were in the hospital because nobody even wanted to deal with them. You know, it was they became like border babies. You know, and eventually opened up a home. And when we had a public opening, well, we had a big debate about should we have a public opening, because there was violence against people that were working with AIDS too. There was such a backlash. And I know that I had friends that would not hug me because I went and I helped with the babies and changed their diapers and did all of that stuff. And I remember people saying to me, how can you help babies that you know are going to die? Like, how can you do that? And it was like, how can I not do that? They should at least know love. Whatever life they have, they should know love. But I had people that didn't invite me to parties, didn't want to be around me just because I did that.
You could actually say, how can you be around people that are dying, no matter what age they are? I mean, someone could actually say that to you also. Just because someone is 1 or a baby, you know, or 85, going through the death experience still takes a caring individual to help see you through that. You know, I think, and that just speaks exactly to what the work that you're doing, you know, currently, and what this program is about too. How, you know, like how you help someone, no matter where they are, die in grace. Like, you know, die with a sense of being, you know, whatever that being is, and no matter how old or young that being is.
And you know, thank you for that. And I think it's also, we've always known how to take care of each other. It's only been in kind of the modern medicalization era, and we saw that with AIDS too. You know, people ended up taking care of their loved ones at home. let me care for him here, not
Right.
in that hospital.
Right.
And so you're right, we started to go back to doing what we always needed to do, and we had to just for the sheer volume of what we were facing. And then the two of us had another challenging experience with death when we lost a best friend who was a gay man, but he died in a car crash.
Right.
And long distance, and that death of someone so sudden amidst that backdrop was jolting for me in many ways, and kind of life-changing, I would say, for me. And I wondered what your experience was in terms of that as well.
I think when something's so sudden, like that suddenness is the same suddenness as people that were dying of AIDS at the time, and it was like kind of bizarre that it happened at that same time. Like in one way, it's like, oh my God, so and so has AIDS, and you had this feeling, and you knew eventually it was going to lead to this. I mean, even it was still sudden, but to someone to like all of a sudden out of the blue, like that you just lose them to an accident, that actually. Gives you a second for pause. Like you have to stop. You have to think about that. You have to think about how in 1 second like that your life is gone, and what that means for you right now, and what that means for you with the people that are around you that you care for and that you love. And I think if we come from the point of love, we can start to understand those kinds of accidents that are so violent to our psyche at the time, because it was definitely shocking, for sure. As I found out long distance, and it was like, what happened? What on what road? It was like, because it was a very violent, collision, that happened, so. And to someone that you had been close to and involved with for a number of years, is very disconcerting. It's disorienting, So.
Yeah, and I remember that at the exact same time, I had a really dear friend who was dying of AIDS, and we were waiting for our other friend, Billy, let's name him, Billy's body to come up from North Carolina. And I was devastated, and yet here's my other friend, David, that's dying. And one of my friends said, look, I know you're brokenhearted, but you need to go say goodbye to David, because if you don't do it today, you might not have a chance tomorrow. And so that summoning some kind of strength to bear witness once again. It informed my life in very strong ways. And I do think what you were saying is that, I think it's Abraham Lincoln that calls it the angels of our better nature. In the AIDS crisis, we also saw people step up and make changes. In healthcare, in gay rights, and then it came out in art, like we saw Philadelphia, that we started to look at what have we done to one another and how can we never do that again.
But I also think, just on a personal level, it brings to me, it shows me your strength in terms of being able to deal with that series of events so close together. Okay, and your friend was absolutely right. You have to go say goodbye to David. You may not see him again. You have a friend, a very close friend, who just was, you lost in a very violent accident. You didn't get a chance to say anything to them.
Right.
They were just going on a trip.
Right.
So I think it speaks to your character and your ability to understand, however you felt at the time, that that the caring part of it is what was important.
Yes, and I think the other thing, and I think AIDS and Bill's death also shaped this, as did other losses in my life, was to not take people for granted and to not take moments for granted, because you can the ego can let you get into petty arguments and you want to win, or you don't want to talk to somebody, or whatever goes on when there's friction between people. And the idea, and I was grateful because there was nothing but loving with me and Billy. So there was nothing unspoken, there was nothing, so at least it was a heartbreak, but it was a clean break. There was no regrets, there was no wondering, yes, I wish I had had a chance to say goodbye, but nothing had gone unspoken in terms of our caring for each other as a friendship. So that was a relief. And I think it taught me, or reminded me, say what needs to be said and don't hold back. And that's kind of what we try to encourage people that are dealing with people at end of life. Please say the things that you want them to hear. This is a chance to speak your truth. And any time is a chance to speak your truth. And I think that's a message I want people, like, say it now, do it now, because none of us really knows when a sudden death or an illness is going to show up. And you're right, the point of this show is to understand that death informs all of our lives, whether we want to deal with it or not.
I feel that death has informed my life since I was really little. I grew up in a very large Italian family, and death has always been there right next to birth.
Yes.
And I remember when people died and when they were born. I remember very specific when my grandmother died, who I really loved. It was my mom's mom. I was turning 16. And the same day I was turning 16, and my mom had to go to Philadelphia to deal with that. And she came home, and I took care of everything that day. And she came home from school. I came home from school and she was in the house. I said, "Mom, what are you doing here? Aren't you like with Grandma?" Be like, aren't you making? "Oh no, it's your 16th birthday. We have to I'm baking a cake for you." And I told that to me was an expression of caring not only for the person who had just died, but the people who are still there. We can't say this is over yet.
No, but the lesson is to live in this moment and celebrate the love.
That's really, why we were friends for decades.
Decades, yeah, we'll leave it at decades. So, Andrew, we have this thing called the Book of Living Love. So you might want to remember somebody. Maybe we'll put Billy's name in there. And I would like to thank TVSB for allowing us to do this wonderful show. I would like to thank my crew, Michael Nicholson, Ken Baxter, Elliot Jacobson, and I want to thank you, our viewers. And hopefully the message that you got from tonight's show is, don't wait, love the people you love now.